Because in him is all bliss, therefore is the law of life, the seeking for happiness, the essential characteristic of every sentient creature. The universe appears by the self-limitation thought of the self. The moment the self ceases to think it, the universe is not. It vanishes as a dream. That's the fundamental idea of the Vedanta. Then it accepts the spirits of the Samkhya, the Purushas, but it says that these spirits are only reflections of oneself, emanated by the activity of the self, and that they all reproduce him in miniature, with the limitations with the universal self has imposed upon them, which are apparently portions of the universe but are really identical with him. It is a play of the Supreme Self that makes the limitations and that reproduces within limitations the qualities of the self. The consciousness of the self of the Supreme Self becomes in the particularized self. Cognition, the power to know, and the existence of the self becomes activity, the power to manifest, and the bliss of the self becomes activity. The bliss of the self becomes, well, the deepest part of all, the longing for happiness, for bliss. The result obtained it is what we call will. And so, in the limited, the power to know and the power to act and the power to will. These are the reflections of the particular self of the essential qualities of the universal self. Otherwise put, that which was universal awareness becomes now cognition in the separated self. That which in the universal self was awareness of itself becomes in the limited self awareness of others. The awareness of the whole becomes the cognition of the individual. So with the existence of the self-existence of the universal self becomes in the limited self activity, preservation of existence. So does the bliss of the universal self in the limited expression of the individual self become the will that seeks for happiness, the self-determination of the self, the seeking for self-realization, the deepest essence of human life. The difference comes with limitation, with the narrowing of the universal qualities in the specific qualities of the limited self. Both are the same in essence, though seeming different in manifestation. We have the power to know, the power to will, and the power to act. These are the three great powers of the self that shows themselves in the separated self in every diversity of forms, from the minute organism to the loftiest people. Then just as in the Samkhya, if the Purusha, the particular self, should identify himself the matter in which he is reflected, then there is delusion and bondage. So in the Vedanta, if the self, eternally free, imagines himself to be bound by matter, identifying himself with the limitations, he is deluded. He is under the domain of Maya. For Maya is the self-identification of the self with its limitations. The eternally free can never be bound by matter. The eternally pure can never be tainted by matter. The eternally knowing can never be deluded by matter. The eternally self-determined can never be ruled by matter, save by his own ignorance. His own foolish fancy limits his inherent powers. He is bound because he imagines himself bound. He is impure because he imagines himself impure. He is ignorant because he imagines himself ignorant. With the vanishing of delusion, he finds that he is eternally pure, eternally wise. Here the great difference between the Samkhya and the Vedanta. According to the Samkhya, Purusha is the spectator and never the actor. According to the Vedanta, self is the only actor, all else is Maya. There is no one else who acts by the self. According to the Vedanta teaching, but Upanishad, the self-will to see and there were eyes, the self-will to hear and there were ears, the self-will to think and there was mind. The eyes, the ears, the mind exist because the self as well them into existence. The self appropriates matter in order that he may manifest his powers through it. There is the distinction between the Samkhya and the Vedanta. In the Samkhya, the propinquity of Purusha brings out in matter or Prakriti all these characteristics. The Prakriti acts and not the Purusha. In the Vedanta, self alone exists and self alone acts. He imagines limitation and matter appears. He appropriates that matter in order that he may manifest his own capacity. The Samkhya is the view of the universe of the scientist. The Vedanta is the view of the universe of the metaphysician. Haeckel unconsciously expounded the Samkhyan philosophy almost perfectly. So close to the Samkhyan is his exposition that another idea would make it purely Samkhyan. He has not yet supplied that propinquity of consciousness which the Samkhyan postulates in its ultimate duality. He has force and matter, he has mind in matter, but he has no Purusha. It is a view of the scientist, indifferent to the why of the fact which he records. The Vedanta, as I said, is a view of the metaphysician. He seeks a unity in which all diversities are rooted and into which they are resolved. Now that light does theosophy on both these systems. Theosophy enables every thinker to reconcile the partial statements which are apparently so contradictory. Theosophy with the Vedanta proclaims the universal self. All that the Vedanta says is the universal self and the self-limitation, Theosophy repeats. Theosophians call these self-limited selves monads, and they say, as the Vedantins say, that these monads reproduce the nature of the universal self whose proportions they are, and hence you find in them the three qualities which you find in the Supreme. They are units, and these represent the Purushas of the Samkhya, but with a very great difference, for they are not passive watchers, but active agents in the drama of the universe. Although being above the fivefold universe, they are as spectators who pull the strings of the players of the stage. The monad takes to himself from the universe of matter atoms which show out the qualities corresponding to his three qualities, and in these he thinks and wills and acts. He takes to himself rhythmic combinations and shows his quality of cognition. He takes to himself combinations that are mobile. Through thus he shows out his activity. He takes the combinations that are inert and shows out his quality of bliss as the will to be happy. Now notice the difference of phrase and thought in the Samkhya. Matter changed to reflect the spirit. In fact, the spirit appropriates portions of matter and through those expresses his own characteristics. An enormous difference. He creates an actor for self-expression, and this actor is the spiritual man of the theosophical teaching. The spirit, the spiritual triad, the Atma, Buddhi, Manas, to whom we shall return in a moment. The monad remains ever beyond the fivefold universe, and in that sense is a spectator. He dwells beyond the five planes of matter, beyond the Atmic or Akasic, beyond the Buddhic plane, the plane of Vayu, beyond the mental plane, the plane of Agni, beyond the astral plane, the plane of Varuna, beyond the physical plane, the plane of Kubera. Beyond all these planes, the monad, the self, stands self-conscious and self-determined. He reigns in changeless space and lives in eternity. But as said above, he appropriates the matter. He takes to himself an atom of Atmic plane, and in that he, as it were, incorporates his will, and that becomes Atma. He appropriates an atom of the Buddhic plane and reflects in that his aspect of cognition, and that becomes Buddhi. He appropriates an atom of the Manasic plane and embodies, as it were, his activity in it, and it becomes Manas. Thus we get Atma plus Buddhi plus Manas. That triad is the reflection in the fivefold universe of the monad beyond the fivefold